Two of the most significant reworks in recent memory were to the Warriors of Chaos and the Ogre Kingdoms. Well, how's about we smash the two of them together, make some kissy noises and see what falls out. Introducing the Chaos Ogres, a mod that aims to bring ogre girth to the Warriors of Chaos. So let's see how it's done. And if you want to see these videos without ads, then you should become a channel member. All the same videos with none of the ads, all for $1 a month. Learn more at the join button below, and now onto the Chaos Ogres. The Chaos Ogres come with their very own legendary lord in the form of Girth the Dreaded Maw, and naturally his effects are all about empowering an ogre-centric playstyle. All units gain extra charge bonus per rank, resulting in some extremely devastating charges if you can keep units alive to the max level. You're also given an upkeep penalty for all demonic units, encouraging you to stick to mortals and ogres as much as you can. However, you also gain a lot more cash from battles and vassals, which aids in upkeeping some of the later expensive ogre units. His own army brings some much needed resistance to ogres, along with immunity to psychology to keep them fighting for as long as possible. For the most part, they have a very normal campaign as far as the Warriors of Chaos are concerned, but their buildings do differ from a normal campaign. They're lacking the regular growth in income buildings, and instead have one focused on souls, gold and replenishment in nearby provinces. They of course have a couple of buildings to recruit the new ogre units, and their main settlement building also offers some recruitment capacity to give you access to ogres no matter what. Speaking of which, they have a full roster of 23 new units, including lords and heroes, so there's lots of new toys to play with. First off, we have the legendary lord, Girth the Dreaded Maw. Stats-wise, he's very similar to Goldfriend, but with a nice chunk more armor and charge bonus, making him very difficult to put away. He lands with a hefty impact, and once in melee will deal a tremendous amount of damage to whatever he finds, with very strong melee stats and strong armor-piercing damage. Naturally, being a big chap, he can take quite a lot of hits in melee or from a range, but worry not, he has a couple of abilities to heal and steal the life of his enemies. For his mounts, he has the Devourer. This actually drops his armor, charge bonus and melee stats to gain a little bit of speed and a nice chunk of weapon strength. The actual armor piercing damage gain is quite moderate, but still, 700 weapon strength is nothing to scoff at. You're now on a giant monster that can cut through swaths of enemies with ease, and even use a breath ability for some added punch. The Chaos Ogre Tyrants are very much slightly weaker versions of Girth, with minor reductions to leadership, attack, charge and damage. They'll still work more or less the same, but will be a little less deadly. For their mounts, they have the Chaos Waste Behemoth. Similar story as the Base Lord, which means a bit weaker than Girth on the Devourer. Quite a hit to weapon strength, so not quite as devastating, but still pretty damn strong. Moving over to the heroes, and first up we have the Chaos Ogre Bruisers. Despite the Bruiser title, these are actually more similar to Hunters from the Ogre Kingdoms, both stats-wise and with the whole hybrid weapons dealio. They suffer minor reductions to melee stats, speed and charge bonus to gain some more armor, leadership and weapon strength. They're still powerful frontlines battlers with some decent impact from their charge, along with good but not great follow-up in sustained melee should it be required. On the missile side of things, they drop a lot of range, ammo and damage, but they are flaming and suppressing, so against the right target can still be devastating. Lastly, they can also replenish the ammo of target units, which, given the roster they're in, will likely end up being using themselves for a little extra firepower. We have the 4 flavors of Exalted Chaos Ogres, so we'll cover the common one first and then just point out the differences for all the others. These are more powerful and attack focused than the Bruisers, with more armor, attack and charge bonus but a lot less defense. They'll tear units apart with devastating charges and follow up melee, but against anything that can fight back, they'll inevitably take a lot of hits. Their abilities further enhance their offensive power, so you want to get them attacking and never let off the gas. The Exalted Chaos Ogres of Nurgle are naturally a lot less powerful in melee than Khorne, but come with some more defense and poison damage, making them a lot better at staying alive in melee. They also come with the Lore of Nurgle, some extra spell power, making them very powerful battling casters. All of this poison, along with their abilities, can make them experts at debuffing enemies and deal slower but consistent damage. Just keep an eye out for ranged focus, as their lower armor does leave them more vulnerable to being focused. The Exalted Chaos Ogres of Slaanesh, in true Slaanesh fashion, drop a ton of armor to gain more speed, attack, damage and charge bonus from Nurgle. They're also bringing the Lore of Slaanesh to their own brand of spell power, making for more fragile but powerful charging heroes with some decent casting. Just keep an eye on them being focused down in melee or from range, as that low armor can really come back to bite them, especially without super high speed. And lastly, the Exalted Chaos Ogre of Siege. Very similar to Nurgle, but drops a little health and charge bonus for more armor, speed and defense along with a barrier. They of course bring the Lore of Siege for some casting, and this rounds them out to being a more defensive battler with some powerful spells. Just manage their barrier well to keep them alive, and you can't go too far wrong. For the melee infantry, we have the Forsaken Noblars. These gain a decent stat boost from regular Noblars, making them a little more defensively sound while still being reliant on other units to do any real damage. Their armor, shields and defense can keep them alive for a moderate amount of time depending on what they're up against, but their low attack and damage mean they won't get much done alone. Forsaken Noblar fighters have nice stat increases almost across the board, making them harder to kill whilst also gaining some armor piercing damage of their own. Don't be fooled, these are still here to hold enemies still whilst your ogres and other units get into position to do all the real damage, but whilst they're in melee, they'll do some okay damage too. And lastly, Forsaken Noblar warriors, another nearly across the board increase with the exception of speed, which drops a little. They're even more heavily armoured and deal a little more damage, but as always, the focus is on defense, staying alive, and holding enemies still for your ogres. The one and only ranged infantry units are the Bow's Forsaken Noblar fighters. They drop a few melee stats from the fighters to gain some low range, low damage missiles. I honestly feel like they're kind of worthless since they won't hold the line as well as fighters nor justify their existence with any extra damage, so I'm honestly not sure when you'd use them. If you somehow do, then I'd probably keep them as a front line that can rain fire on enemies to soften them up on the approach. Moving over to by far the biggest category, the monsters and beasts. First up, the Chaos Ogre Brawlers. Coming from Ogre Bulls, they drop a little bit of speed and defense to gain more attack and charge bonus. All of this means you can use them pretty much the same to cycle charge the hell out of enemies whilst avoiding too much sustained melee. Their lower melee stats, especially defense, make them vulnerable to being taken down by anything half decent, and their low armor means they don't even need to deal that much damage to be a threat. Keep them on the move and charging, and they'll do great. The dual weapons Chaos Ogre Brawlers are the exact same unit but with 15 anti-infantry bonus. Can still be used the exact same but now deal some more damage to infantry. The Great Weapons Chaos Ogre Fighters keep the same speed as Brawlers but otherwise gain improvements across the board, most notably to armor, attack, and armor piercing damage. All of this makes them more devastating charges and a little better in sustained combat, but the focus should still be on constant movement. Their defense is still low, and armor is moderate at best, so even mid damage will punch through their defenses in no time. The Iron Fist Chaos Ogre Fighters have the same damage as Brawlers but gain the same armor and charge stats as the Great Weapons. However, they also gain shields and a nice boost to defense without quite reaching the same heights for attack. This makes for a tankier ogre but limits their damage output to charging since their attack and damage really is quite low. If you struggle to keep others alive, then these will sustain a little better, but you are sacrificing a lot of damage to do so. The Chaos Ogres of Khorne, coming from Great Weapons, see a huge increase to attack along with leadership, weapon strength and charge bonus, making them into the ultimate offensive ogre. They do drop some speed, so charge and flanking will have to be well timed to be pulled off effectively. Their sustained combat ability is a lot better, but just keep an eye on damage coming back at them with that lower armor. The Chaos Ogres of Nurgle compared to Khorne drop speed, attack, armor piercing damage and charge bonus, but gain a nice chunk of HP and defense. This makes them extremely tanky monsters that can absorb a surprising amount of hits for something so large. They even come with regen and a defense buffing aura, so are extremely hard to take down without a lot of focus. Not the most damage, but if you want some tanky support monsters, they'll do that job great. The Chaos Ogres of Slaanesh have the same defense and weapon strength as Khorne, but drop some attack, armor and HP to gain a huge chunk of speed and some more charge bonus to be the ultimate charging ogres. With Devastating Flanker, if you hit enemies in the side or back, they'll go down in moments, but do not stick around after charging or that defense and armor will quickly come back to bite you. And the Chaos Ogres of Tzeentch have more defense and armor than Khorne but less attack and charge. A strong all-around ogre with good damage and decent survivability with the barrier, plus some magical damage for dealing with resistance-based targets. The Great Weapons Chaos Ogre Warmongers compared to the fighters drop a little speed but otherwise gain improvements to every stat but attack. This includes a ton of armor, lots of defense, charge bonus, and damage. This makes them very tough to take down, deadly in melee, and powerful charges if a little bit sluggish. They're the best all-around ogre on the market and will perform those jobs of running around and beating units to a pace no problem. And lastly, the Chaos Waste Behemoth, basically just the Tyrant's mount of our rider, so a powerful monster with high armor piercing area damage. They drop a lot of stats from the lords but are still devastating in melee, but not the most tanky with lower armor and defense. Use them cautiously on clumps of armored but less offense focused enemies to keep them safe, make use of their breath for some ranged poke when you can, and just manage them well to keep them fighting fit. And our last category is the Missile Monsters and Beasts. First up, the Spears Chaos Ogre Fighters. They drop attack and weapon strength from the Great Ogre Fighters, but do gain some low ammo missiles with decent, lower range armor piercing damage. They're a great hybrid weapons anti-large units to get them lobbing spears at something big for loads of damage. Just be cautious of letting them go into melee until they absolutely have to, as their melee stats are not the greatest for damage output or survivability. And finally, the Ogre Pistols Chaos Ogre Warmongers. They drop melee stats and weapon strength from the Great Weapons Warmongers. They instead gain some limited ammo low range missiles with armor piercing suppressing damage. They're hardly going to blow anything away, but they'll do some decent damage to soften up enemies before they land themselves in melee. As usual, try and use all their ammo before bothering to get into melee, but once they are, they're not half bad for both damage and survivability. Keep them charging for the most damage possible with the least risk, and you're golden. Now to wrap up with a mod review. You can only go so far wrong when making a custom lord for the Warriors of Chaos, and I'm pleased to report that this is another banger campaign to add to the list. You have a whole legendary lord complete with some unique buildings and faction effects to give him a distinct playstyle from the others. I do think it would have been cool to include some of the ogre mechanics and things, but I understand how combining the ogres and Warriors of Chaos would be pretty tough, so I'm not going to get too upset about it, especially because you're getting a whole roster full of new units. Alright, 20-something units isn't a whole new roster, but it's still an impressive number, and almost all of them are some measure of good. The only ones that aren't are the Noblars, and even then, that's kind of the point. I don't mind them being weak, because they're only there to hold enemies still for ogres to smash them. However, because you are playing as the Warriors of Chaos, you could just use, you know, Chaos Warriors. You have access to the rest of the roster, so no real reason to use Noblars outside of Novelty, which wears off fast when they get enrolled every single battle. Anyway, outside of Noblars, the other units in the mod are great. You have a range of ogres for each stage of the game, a new big monster, and a few lords and heroes to keep things fresh. I will say it's a shame you can't use warband upgrades, as it would really help them feel more complete as a Warriors of Chaos faction. There's quite a linear progression for most of these units, including branching out to the 4 flavors of Chaos, so it's a shame that we're limited to traditional recruitment, especially given how Warriors of Chaos recruitment works. The heroes can also not be dedicated to certain Chaos gods, only being able to be recruited as certain flavors, with no option for change. I will stress that none of these are deal breakers, and the mod is perfectly fun and functional without them, but there's a bunch of little touches that could really elevate this to feeling like an official Warriors of Chaos faction. But regardless, this is a fantastic mod with excellent looking and, for the most part, performing units. It's an easy recommendation from me as long as you enjoy the Warriors of Chaos already. Chances are you'll have a blast with these guys too. And if you want to know which DLCs are a blast to play, then check out this video for the top 10.